Sometimes in life, you come across certain people who leave a lasting impression, not just for what they do, but for how they do it. Their presence, their wisdom, their way of making you feel truly heard and understood. I first met Helen Mentha back in 2007 at a Motivational Interviewing network of trainers workshop, both of us learning how to train others in this remarkable approach to human connection and change. And right from that very first encounter, I knew Helen was someone very special to talk to. Helen is a clinical psychologist, specialist trainer, and long-time member and former board director of the Motivational Interviewing network of trainers. She's spent decades working alongside professionals in mental health, addiction, healthcare, education, and even corporate leadership, helping them bring more respect, humanity, and compassion into the way they work with people. Helen's unique gift is her ability to translate the deep science of behaviour change into something warm, human, and accessible. And nowhere is that more beautifully captured than in her book, Someone Good to Talk To, a collection of reflections on the therapeutic relationship that feels like sitting down for a heartfelt conversation with an old friend. In this episode, we explore the art of being someone good to talk to, not just as therapists or professionals, but as fellow human beings navigating life together. And so I bring you Helen Mentha. We met actually on 11th of April 2007. I looked it up.
I know the month and I know the year, but I didn't know the date. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, Margot Bristow and Jackie Elder, of course, they were helping organise it all, and they came rushing over to introduce us as the two Aussies in the room, sort of thing. And you were like, I came all this way and have to sit next to another Australian?
And the beginning of a good friendship.
Yes, and it all kind of continued from there. How did you first come across motivational interviewing? And what was it like when, for you when you first arrived at the Mint TNT?
Well, I first met MI after I'd done my training and then going to work in the drug and alcohol sector where it was kind of a bread and butter in a way. Like I realized, getting more into it, that our version of it at the time was a bit kind of what we'd picked up. We hadn't really picked up the fullness of the approach, but it sat really well in the drug and alcohol world. So I started hearing about MI then, and it just felt like it was filling in gaps. So my core training was cognitive behavior therapy, and I felt like I was kind of doing this scattergun approach to therapy with people like, what about this? What about that? I've been taught this. This looks helpful. This is evidence-based. And just feeling like it wasn't landing, or it wasn't as, there was something really missing. And then MI starts talking about what's actually happening in this conversation between us right now. How are they feeling about change? How are they feeling about this conversation? What's helping them to lean in? What's maybe making them lean back? And it was just making so much sense of those moments of missing what was really happening in the conversation. And so I got increasingly into it in a way that is not the way we teach it. So we were pretty much self-taught. I had the book, had conversations with colleagues. There was a bit of MI is so common sense, we kind of don't need to teach it. But also, as you know, we had hardly anyone who was a member of Mint at the time. So we didn't really know what we didn't know. And it was fantastic because it meant I could take a bit from the book, try it out, just try one thing, like ask, offer, ask, or, licit, provide, elicit, as we called it then, and went, that was good. Or just trying one thing and going, that person relaxed a bit. So I liked the conversations that I was getting back. It made me look forward to trying it. So I kind of think of getting to know MI more like getting to know and, down the track best friend. When you first meet someone that you gel with, you're not going, it's going to take 10 years of fun times for us to be really close. We're just like, oh, I'm looking forward to meeting them for coffee. I'm looking forward to maybe going to the movies with them. I'm looking forward to, maybe going on a holiday with them. It's just something that grows. So I then started being asked to train MI. And so I then got curious about this network of trainers that maybe knew a bit more about training MI than I did. And when I got to that TNT in 2007, it was a revelation because I realized how much we didn't know because we were so self-taught. And it just opened up this just depths and nuances and a community of people who are curious about how do you think about these ideas? How do you use them in practice? How do you share them with others? How do you help them to use them in practice? So it's just something that kind of grew. And I'm a little bit obsessive. So I really like to get into a topic in depth. So sometimes I give my bio as I got obsessed about MI, so you don't have to. My job's to come back and bring you some of the really good bits, and then you can decide if you want to find out what else it's got to offer.
No, I love that description because it's funny. In a way, it reminds me even of how Professor Bill Miller describes kind of coming across MI himself. It was almost this little discovering what worked really, in a sense, trying things out with the people that we're speaking with and, just sort of watching for the response and being aware of the like you said those moments in the conversation, rather than the higher order kind of strategies or something that we might bring to it through CBT. We're really sort of watching these conversational moments and just noticing what seems to be helpful. And the book, I guess, provided you with little kind of tidbits there that you could try out and see how that responded. But yeah, like you, getting to that same Mint training new trainers workshop, it was a sort of a revelation. I kind of feel like, as much as it was about learning how to train MI, I suppose, it just taught me so much more the depth and breadth of motivational interviewing itself.
Yeah. And I do think in a way, MI can be almost cursed by how user-friendly it is, how common sense it sounds, because you hear some of the concepts and go, yeah, of course, people want to be listened to. Yeah, of course, people are ambivalent. And it's more the depth is in the doing. Like I love that idea of over time, a piano doesn't get more notes. It's what you learn to do with those same notes that grows. And I think there's something of that in MI, that the depth comes from revisiting and revisiting and revisiting these foundational skills. And I've had experiences. Remember, one was I was standing in the queue for lunch at a Mint forum, just having a casual conversation with someone, and they made one comment about affirming. And I'm like that exploding brain emoji going, oh, new depth of insight in a concept that I'd been teaching. And there's something so exciting about when you find a discipline or a craft that resonates with you, it opens up infinite learning. And it might be MI for me, it might be something else for someone else. But there's something about when you find a way of working that kind of gets you on that fundamental level that you kind of remain infinitely curious. It's kind of cool.
I said to you before we started that every now and then I have these conversations with people and I get shivers up my spine, when people say things, and I set you as that as a bit of a sort of a goal or something for you, and you've done it already within the first few minutes, Helen.
What did I
Um,
say?
oh, just that idea of the metaphor of the piano. I mean, that just, wow, that just is like that's a brain explosion emoji moment for me. I don't know whether that just rolls off the tongue for you, but that really, that sums it up with MI, I think. It's kind of, simple in a way. There's a number of notes to MI that we might talk about and teach, and there it is. And I guess, the book is a finite book and so on. And yet there's just such a wide, beautiful range of songs that you can play, I suppose, or whatever that, and it just really, you have a knack for that. The other one that's probably a simple one of yours that rolls off the tongue, but for me, I quote you a lot is just that idea of giving the person we're talking to all the good lines. That's one of yours, I think. But
I can't claim that one.
can't claim that one.
That comes directly from Bill Miller.
That's a
But
Bill
it's
Miller
it's,
one.
it's a beautiful way of thinking about it, isn't it? Like how
Yes.
tempting it is for us to take the good lines, and yet when the person hears themselves really connect with what does
Yeah.
this mean for them,
Yeah.
it's just so much more powerful.
And actually, I just realized I should say Helen Mentha. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. So you have this wonderful book, and I have the Kindle version. I don't know if you can see it there, but yeah, Someone Good to Talk to, Reflections on Motivational Interviewing Practice. And in the title of the book, I guess, you capture something quite profound as well, just being someone good to talk to. It sort of sounds simple, but I think it speaks to all of what you've just been describing. There's so much nuance and subtlety to it in a way. So what does this phrase mean to you?
It's like a foundation to come home to, that it is more fundamental, more kind of everyday language. When we get caught up in the busyness of the work, when we get caught up in all of the things we're trying to achieve, and although it seems so obvious, it's sometimes one of the first things to go when workers are under pressure.
Hmm.
And I train a lot of people, whether they're therapists, whether they're working in allied health or corrections or education system or all sorts of different settings. And when people are really feeling this pressure of only got so much time, we've got to get this outcome. The person could die or lose a limb or lose their child or get sent back to prison or any number of different consequences that are kind of hanging over the head of this person, that being someone good to talk to can actually be one of the first things to go.
Mm.
Because we get so task focused, it's almost like we don't have the luxury of just being a relief. And yet, who else would we want to talk to? Like, if we're going to go talk to someone about something really difficult that we'd maybe rather not face or we'd really rather wasn't happening, the ideal is, well, at least I get to talk about it with them. At least this feels like a safe place to talk about this. There's something about that makes, I think, it more possible for people to have a look at, what are the dilemmas I'm facing? What are the prickly things that every fiber of my body wants to just put off or avoid or not look at because it's just so uncomfortable.
Mm. It's sort of like when we are trying to be someone to talk to, and yet so much is at stake, I guess. We can see the where this could go for the person, or and I've often really felt that it's that threat system activation there that happens for the listener, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose. And that it's sort of, we get stuck deep in sort of the fight, flight, freeze, appease, or whatever type responding, and that makes it so hard to then just Because there's a calmness, I suppose, is there, about being someone good to talk to, or there's a sort of a groundedness that we're
Mm.
trying to get. Can you talk a bit more about all that?
Um, yeah, and I think if you want to think of the second part to this, I can also I love the work of Tanya Cooper-Terrence, who talks. She's brought together that writing reflex, that urge to get into the fixing mode, with polyvagal theory and trauma response, and what is it that gets activated in us? How does it turn up? And it might turn up in different ways. She's got some beautiful ways of talking about that. And I guess for me, it's like, where am I heading to? Maybe this is a strategy that I personally find helpful, is what am I trying to lean into rather than what am I trying to lean away from? Just coming back to that fundamental of right here, right now, can this be a moment where this person feels okay to be in this conversation or be in this room? It's like running a training, even though that's not an MI session, so to speak. Part of that aim of how can I have people rather be in the room here, even if some of this feels confronting or difficult or challenging, or maybe they're not sure if they can do it and all of their imposter syndrome's firing off, that they'd rather be here than doing admin, or they'd rather be
Okay.
here that, it's like learning and opening up to difficulties starts, I think, with feeling comfortable enough to be physically where we are and feel like at
Mm.
least, and then you get all the doing stuff come from the worker side if we're not careful. And maybe that's okay. It's more, how do we just catch and come back? How do we just catch, oh, I got into my thinking, I got into my agenda, I got into my hopes, I got into my direction of where I'd like this conversation to go, and just come back to, we're two people in a room and we're both having some struggles here in our own ways on both sides of the conversation.
Mm.
And I think that's one thing I love about MI is it's, in a way, I mean, yes, it provides some really helpful, practical ways of thinking about those normal challenges of change and the normal challenges of change conversations. Like, how do we navigate ambivalence, stuckness, the inertia? Even when we want change, it's hard to initiate it. We get cold feet just as we're about to do it. We want to give it up as soon as it gets difficult, so it offers a lot around that. But I think one of the things that MI offers is a really user-friendly way of helping us as helping professionals, carers, support workers, to look at what's going on for us in our half of the conversation in a really friendly way, in a really accepting, non-pathologizing way. Like, a lot of the times when we look at what's going on for us as workers, it's focused on what's going wrong for us as workers. We've got compassion fatigue, or we've got transference and countertransference. It's like, well, of course we're having reactions. We're human. And if we're hearing stories that are shocking, it's normal to feel some level of shock. If we're hearing stories that are distressing, it's normal. It's kind of healthy to feel a degree of distress. But MI offered some very user-friendly ways of looking at what's more going on for us in our half of the conversation. And MI is actually all about our half of the conversation. And this idea of let them have their half. They're at where they're at. They're sitting with whatever it is that they're sitting with. We can't make anyone think something, feel something, do something. So why are we trying? There's only one person in this conversation we have control over, and that's us. So, like, what are we doing in our half? How are we turning up? How are we paying attention? What skills are we using when we talk? how do we not talk when we want to talk? Big one for me. And then what are we doing with what we're hearing? So it's like there's this, I know I've had a number of people come up to me after workshops saying things like, I came to this workshop wanting to change my clients, and I'm realizing maybe I'm the one who needs to change, but there's something so lovely in that because it's the only part of this that we've got control over. That's something we can play with. That's something that does give us some wriggle room. Oh, maybe I've got a few more choices here than I thought I had. Great, let's play with them.
Yeah, the sort of it's the interaction, I guess, isn't it? That we're really sort of thinking about. I mean, there are tricky client factors, I guess, that people are experiencing very difficult and confronting situations in their lives, and there's various potentially threat system activation there as well. But then there's, for want of a better word, clinician factors, I guess, that there's certain things happening within us, and we can bring awareness to that and try to work with that. And then there's these sort of, it's in the interaction too, that I suppose in a way we can't, we're not trying to make them do something, and we are most able to change certain things in ourselves, but partly that is also how we respond to the things that the other person is experiencing or saying, or and so there's kind of it just really interaction, it bounces back and forward in that sort of way, where being someone good to talk to is about managing our own part that we're playing, and you sort of you were doing that sort of thing. It's almost bringing it back to the breath, activating parasympathetic nervous system, trying to feel calm and grounded and so on, which isn't easy. It's sort of something that we have to really kind of practice before we're even in that conversation, I suppose, and bring it to the conversation in a way. And then we start sort of, I guess, really listening out for certain things from that other person, and kind of carefully responding. What would you say about that piece of it?
Yeah, because I think one thing you're describing there is it's a stance of equality, that we're meeting people as fundamental equals. It just happens that we've got different roles in the room today. In the kind of conversation that we're having, but there isn't a I know better, or it's more of a let's work this out together. And I think one of the things that MI tunes us into, and one thing that when people meet MI for the first time, they can get a little uncomfortable with this idea of focusing on change talk, because it sounds like we're back to having an agenda, or we're on a mission. We're trying to draw out the side of the change that we want to see. Like that feels a bit, or it feels a bit technical. I think for me, one thing, we're really trying to listen to who is this whole person and what do they really want. And one way I tend to think of when we listen for change talk, we're listening for their language of hope. And it often turns up in whispers, like, what are these little deep down hopes they maybe have for themselves that they're struggling to dare let themselves want? Because it's easier to settle for what we know. It's easier to settle for the thing that doesn't set us up for disappointment. So there is this, like when we get more into, now we're talking about this change, now we're talking about this possibility, we do tune a bit more into, so what might be good about it? What might that mean for you? Partly because that curiosity, that interest is already within them, and we're really trying to draw out what's their hopes, when the thing that's often being yelled in the room or yelled inside their head and in their heart and in their body is all the fears of change. It's kind of, that's the sustained talk. So we're really just trying to see, can we get change on a level playing field with what they're currently doing, and then now see what it looks like. Now, what do you really want for yourself? So there's this kind of careful or considered responding to what people are saying, but it's still always in service of what do you deep down truly want for yourself? And I think that's part of what we do is we broaden that awareness from the most obvious bit, like one of the, and I can't remember, do I talk about it in the book, or maybe I've got a blog as well, the idea of the unstubbed toe. Like when we walk along, let's just say you stub your big right toe. Who thinks, like, the first thing that you think is, wow, my left toe feels fantastic. And yet it often does. I mean, you can even do this as a meditation practice of, like, everyone listening to this right now, draw your attention to your left unstubbed toe and feel how nice that feels for that toe not to be in pain. It's kind of spacious, it's kind of light. And yet, of course, we're going to focus on, we've just stubbed our toe, we're in pain, it hurts, it's a shock. And then what do we learn as clinicians? But to ask the pants off that stubbed toe. So I'm like, oh, have I understood? You've stubbed your toe, your right toe. Let me draw a picture of that. What did you stub it on? Have you stubbed your toe before? Do you have a history of stubbed toes in your family? We kind of both kind of cohering around the pain. And yet there is this part of them that is actually holding them up. There is this unstubbed toe. There are these qualities that are actually help them to survive, help them to be there, holding them up. And I think this part of MI is opening up that awareness of there's the pain and what else? There's the pain and what's the hope? And the resources and the strengths and the values. There's this, and it's not unique to MI, but I think MI offers a way of doing that that's kind of graspable. And I do think, we want to be mindful of, and one thing I love about MI is it's not actually a therapy. There are times when MI might be enough, but I can't think of too many conversations, if any, where all I've used was MI. It's a method of communication. So it's just this way of how are we turning up and paying attention in the conversation? How are we responding in the conversation? And then maybe we're bringing other therapies, other modalities in as well.
Yes, our sort of evolved brains really focus on threat and pain and danger, and it's sort of designed that way, really.
Naturally.
It's in the design, and it had to be because of the importance of avoiding the threats or being, kind of seeking safety from those sorts of threats. And it's interesting how you say that actually sometimes in a conversation, both parties get a little bit focused in on those more threatening aspects, the fear or the vulnerability or the shame that kind of have these megaphones really for the person themselves, but also the listener might be really kind of drawn to those as well and trying to examine them, and in a funny sort of a way that gives them prominence, I guess. Or the other reaction might be too to try to logically convince the person that actually they don't have a stub toe, or their stub toes.
Not bad. It's only a toe.
It's not so bad as they might think, or so we get into so one option sometimes is to really focus in on those painful, fearful aspects, and kind of suddenly they're very prominent in the conversation. Or the other is to try to convince the person that actually logically we can change all of that, and of course then that makes it more prominent too, because the person feels the urge to advocate for those fears and pains and so on. And it's almost like being someone good to talk to is to have a sense of safeness in the relationship, whereby the person can talk about and explore and describe and feel really heard and understood around those fearful, painful aspects. And then almost naturally, they are able to shift the spotlight too. You know, they sort of move to the left toe, you know, or they move to the hope, as you say. That hope piece is, you know, sort of profound. And Bill Miller, of course, has written his book on hope recently, and obviously he's thinking like you, that, you know, that this is perhaps the crux of the matter on the Change Talk side, is the dare to hope piece of it.
Yeah, I do think there's a part of what we're trying to do is fan the flames of hope that already exist within the person. I kind of like that metaphor of building a fire in a wood burner or a campfire, that it just starts with that little flicker, and that's already within the person. And at first, when we tend to hope, we need to be really attentive and tender with it. We can't just chuck a massive log on. They're not ready for that. Like
It'll stamp it out.
the little, yeah, the kindling, and we might add a little oxygen ourselves, but the fire's still within them. And then maybe it just builds, it takes a little more, and then maybe we don't have to add quite as much to help that fire burn. We can leave it a little bit longer. We can then come back, put on something a little bigger. And in the end, that fire is burning for itself, by itself. We don't need to tend so much to it for ourselves. This idea of, you know, one way we can think of clinical work as we are hope merchants. Like the fundamental, you know, people without hope don't do anything different. Like, we need hope that something different will happen for us to do something different. So that might start as well with us as the worker holding hope for the person, holding some faith, holding some optimism. The whole, you know, there's so many different ways of working, but it seems like one of those fundamental ingredients of what is actually working in a therapeutic exchange is fostering hope, because only someone who has hope is likely to go and do anything different, try something different, go out of their comfort zone, because change sucks. You know, change can be really hard. So we need to have the fire in our bellies to make it worthwhile. And I wonder if sometimes what happens, you know, as clinicians, is we get that little hope and then we chuck the log on. You know, we try and take the process too far. And in one way we can think about of, like, yes, we want to see people make change that works for them, but we don't want people to make quick change if all someone does is, when they have a setback, conclude that, see, that change doesn't work for me. We want to really stoke that fire so that the person is so connected to that change, they have such a sense of what this deep down really means for them, that they're willing to keep going when it gets tough. They'd be willing to pick themselves up and try again when they have setbacks, when they fail, because they will fail, because change is messy. You know, we want to help build that really strong sense of hope. And often that takes longer than we might want as a worker. We want enough hope to go, great, we want to see something happen. Like, as workers, we often live to see people go better, which means we can jump ahead, or we can be tempted to throw on that log before we're ready, before the person's ready.
Yeah, that, in a sense, that's the fixing reflex, or it's kind of like it's often comes from a place of enthusiasm in a way, doesn't it? And we feel, oh, you know, this might actually, this could work, and that would feel hopeful or whatever, and we throw a big darn log on the fire and snuff it out or something. It's a delicate process, the way you describe it, and a very thoughtful process, and patience is one of the qualities maybe too there for the for the person who's trying to be good to talk to, that it's a sort of there's a patience maybe that we try to have, so that we're not rushing to things and
And every fiber of our body wants to rush to things. And
yeah.
I think this, I can remember Bill talking about Benjamin Franklin talking about virtues.
Oh
And this
yes.
idea that the way he talked about it's not, oh, you have these virtues, then you behave in these virtuous ways. He actually said it works the opposite. When you engage in these virtuous behaviors, you strengthen and cultivate these virtues. And I think there's a lot in MI that is scaffolding to help us act in a more patient way, even if we're not feeling patient right now.
Yes.
Like, it gives us some structure, it gives us some concrete things to do to slow us down. Because I wonder if the other side to this, the one is this fostering of hope. But there's also what's our relationship with ambivalence that's playing out. So if I think when I first met MI, I think it was introduced to me as, this is a way of helping people to resolve their ambivalence. Because when I think of the training that I did, and then why wasn't it working in the way that it was supposed to when I got out into the real world of doing therapy, was I realized I was taught all these evidence-based approaches that they didn't tell us came with what seemed like a silent disclaimer. When the person's ready, look at all these fantastic things that we can do. And then I went to work in drug and alcohol when no one was ready. Ambivalence was compulsory, if not progress. I was working with mandated clients who were like, I'm definitely not ready. And in fact, they're wrong for even wanting me to do this in the first place. And MI seemed to be one of the only approaches going, oh, they're ambivalent, or they're not sure, they got mixed feelings. Great, let's meet them there. What's that about? And it still then was presented as, oh, and once we're there looking at this ambivalence, we can help them to resolve it. Whereas I think now I've got to a point of more, MI as a way of helping people to experience their ambivalence. And this really got brought home I went to a conference, got nothing to do with MI, where one of the presenters was talking about exposure in the therapy literature. So not so much exposure of like, graded exposure to phobias, but more one of the fundamental things of that therapy is offering is a way of helping people to contact and tolerate and sit with the distress that they normally want to avoid and shut down. And that it's in sitting with and contacting and accepting that this is how it is, that this is how it feels, then maybe healing can happen. And Carl Rogers talks about, so that there's a lovely quote that I'm going to entirely butcher about, when I can truly accept myself, then I can change.
Yes.
So I think it kind of got me thinking about, well, really what we're trying to do is create a conversation where people can tolerate their ambivalence, sit in their ambivalence, accept their ambivalence without needing to kind of do anything with it, so that they can really stay with, hang on, what am I wrestling with and what do I truly want? And from there, we can really start to help foster and build up that hope of what is it that people want to be different. And that's within a conversation where we've got a couple of forces happening on both sides. And I am going to swear a little bit because this comes from my drug and alcohol background. So one of the phrases that I heard the most when people were describing trying not to use their drug of choice, or trying not to use, and then they had a really strong craving, or they had this, and it was at a point where they were trying not to use, but they got so uncomfortable that the two words that often preceded an unwanted incident of use is, oh, fuck it, I'll just use.
Yeah.
Like, I just want this discomfort to go away.
Yes.
So the natural urge when we contact the discomfort of ambivalence, the uncertainty, the fears that has no ground yet, that has no path out of it yet, is we go, oh, fuck it, I'll just do what I normally do. And in the therapeutic conversation, we've got a clinician who is also meeting that ambivalence, who is also sitting with that uncertainty and there's no ground yet and it's uncomfortable. And their urge is, oh, fuck it, why don't I just suggest this?
Yes.
So we've got two people coming together to talk about ambivalence, and they're both conspiring in a way not to talk about it. So the MI offers us some scaffolding for how do we help make it safe for someone else to just start to lean and explore what is going on here, and that it's not a bad place to be. Like Bill will talk about, ambivalence is a normal part of the change process. It's a process of evaluation. Like it's actually quite healthy. What happens when we just slow down, suspend our need to get anywhere, resolve anything, so we can really explore it. And from there, maybe it's actually more likely something positive will happen. So that kind of the idea of helping people, like that MI might actually be exposure therapy for ambivalence.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like what you said. I mean, in some situations, ambivalence is progress, actually. Is sort of the person is kind of stuck in a particular place, and to move forward into ambivalence is kind of progress in itself. And then once you're there, it's normal, it's healthy, it's perhaps even beneficial, really, for people to be able to sit with the ambivalence and to explore it and to explore the various sides. And we feel different ways about this thing that we're thinking about, and people can sometimes feel very tempted just to retreat back to the way I've always done things, say, because that, in its own funny sort of a way, it feels safer, or at least feels more familiar, and as sometimes even they might recognize the harm that's associated with it, and yet somehow or other it feels more comfortable than the ambivalence. And so we're trying to sort of see maybe MI is a kind of an exposure to the discomfort of having mixed feelings about something, and being able to just sit with that to then explore and get the benefits that might be there. But the uncertainty is also a challenge for the listener too, the clinician or whoever it might be. It feels very uncomfortable to be uncertain. There's I suppose courage is in there, is it, that too? That we've talked about a few concepts and qualities: hope and patience and courage. The courage to, because it feels uncomfortable, and the unknown. Human beings don't like the unknown, I suppose, and so it takes courage on the part of the client, say, to actually, yes, to lean in towards the ambivalence and so on. But it takes courage on the clinician's part as well to hold that space too, without jumping in and trying to fix it.
Yeah. And I think that's where the concept of autonomy in MI is so helpful, because it helps us to step back to go, it's actually not my life. It's not my consequences. I am not the person to decide what is right here. So I don't know if you've seen Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones interviewed about a fairly well-documented history of drug use. And I remember there's one interview where he gets his look on his face like, I can't believe they let me get away with that. And that was wild. Sometimes we're just working with the Keith Richards of Melbourne, or, like it's like people will, I think we can get a bit caught in the idea that there is a right outcome here. And if we can lean into that of, it's not my life, it's not my choice, it opens up so much more curiosity to go, oh, what does emerge here? What is important? What are you weighing up? I remember working with a guy who had a question of, was he using too much cannabis, or was it more that he and his partner had a different idea about what an appropriate level of cannabis use was? Because he came from a culture where that was really normal. She came from a culture where that wasn't so much. And remember we had some conversations, and at the end, he said, "Oh, I've drawn my conclusion. I think we've just got a different idea about what's an okay level of smoking cannabis. But I'm going to stop because I realize the conflict in my relationship, and my relationship is more important to me. And, I'm willing to give up the smoking if that's going to protect something that matters more." So just that kind of curiosity of, which I think will ask us to suspend our own hopes in some way. So one thing I find, I had a great supervisor who said, if you're trying not to do something, give yourself something else to do instead. And I realized that one of the things that if I'm getting a bit caught up on what my hopes are for someone, that if I frame the work as the real target behavior is helping this person make a decision they can live with, that's the thing that we're trying to facilitate, not we're trying to facilitate a particular outcome. And if we think about, relationships, we all know people who have been in a relationship that was in a really bad place. And we all know people who left that, or, stayed in that relationship and it became one of the best relationships that you know, or stayed in that relationship and it got worse. It became hell on earth for those two people, or walked away and went, oh, thank goodness, actually, I think that was the right choice. Or we all know people who've walked away and gone, maybe I actually walked away from the best thing in my life. That's the biggest regret. So that idea of how do we know? How do we know what the exact right outcome here is? The thing we can help support people to do is make a decision that they can live with, that they deeply know why they made that choice, why they took the risks or avoided other risks, because we can't know how it's going to go. We can't know how it's going to turn out for this person. But if the person can at least know, I know why I'm on this path. I know why I went down this path. This felt the most aligned to who I truly am, who I really want to be, or where I really want to go. I find that has been helpful in turning the volume down, not off, on a lot of my own, hopes and missions. That's not to say that they don't still get in the way. And one of the chapters in the book, which I feel very attached to, is called "You Will Say Dumb Things." Because, oh my God, that's probably me projecting, but that's a story of my entire career. That's a story of my entire personal life. I constantly say dumb things, but it's like, are we going in a helpful direction? Can we really ask for more?
Yes. Yes, you begin that chapter. If you communicate for a living, or at all for that matter, you will say things that go off track, are insensitive, and just plain wrong. I have a career full of evidence of this. Just ask me. And we can all absolutely relate to that. But actually, yes, isn't it interesting? Like we want to hold hope, and we're sort of exploring hope for the person. It's just that the hope also has to come with a kind of a wisdom, or something like that. That hope itself can be a motivator for us to do things that might be more or less helpful in a way. And so it's a bit like when you buy a house, like on the first of all, you have to sort of fall in love with the house and imagine that you could live there and whatever, and sort of have all this sort of sense of the future. And but then you have to somehow dial that back, because you got to get into the bit about how much am I going to pay for this house, and you know, like, can I afford it, and whatever. So it's but hope in MI is a little bit like that. We really want to connect with a sort of a hopefulness for the future, and then sort of be aware of that, and sort of apply that wisely, I suppose, in a way. I like how you've given little examples. It triggered in my mind someone, this wonderful fellow I was talking to recently, who had quit his gambling, 2 or 3 years ago, but had noticed that when he was playing golf with his mates, they wanted to put a round of beers on the results, sort of thing, and whoever lost had to pay. Sort of that was the thing. And he sort of asked me directly, do you think this would be okay, or is it sort of risky in terms of, getting back into gambling and that sort of stuff? And of course, like you said, we don't know really the future, and I was certainly in that uncertain space. There was a part of me that wanted to just kind of give him the answer, but of course, I managed to just kind of manage that urge a little bit. And well, I mean, what are your thoughts there, like in terms of the clinician trying to listen well, trying to be someone good to talk to, but sitting with that uncertainty in a scenario like that?
One, I think it helps us to have a lot of empathy, because now we got something in common.
Mm-hmm.
We're both sitting with uncertainty. We're both sitting with the messiness. There's the parallel process, and it's just, as I said before, like, we've got different roles right now, but we're fundamentally the same creatures in the room. So I think there's something of making some space for that. And then again, I think one thing that MI really offers is in this way of paying attention to, for want of a better way of putting it, the mechanics of the conversation, like the how of the conversation, not just the what of the conversation. I think it helps us to pick up a bit more readily when we're going off track. We start to get more yes, but reactions, or the person starts going, yeah, I guess so, which is often code for no. Or you could say that, no. That it helps us to tune into, oh, are we attuned? Or is there a little bit of distance? Are their eyes looking a little bit more glazed? Or are they looking a bit, the words are right, but the music's wrong?
Mm.
And be able to either catch it, or it gives us a framework for reflecting after the conversation to make sense of, I think that might be what happened. And that if the idea of being able to just apologize freely and recalibrate and catch, it might be something, I'm sorry, I think I just jumped way ahead here. Where are you at with this? How's it feeling for you? That if we can accept that we won't always meet people where they are, or we won't always get it right, or we're going to have our bad days where we just can't be on our A game with people that day, and we're more likely to say dumb things or miss the mark or go into our monologue, or whatever. It helps us have some very friendly ways for us as workers to come back and go, oh, I think I got ahead of you. I'm not sure I've actually understood. I've maybe misunderstood the point that you were saying. Can you explain a little bit more? Just that curiosity to go, oh, are we drawing apart? Are we coming back together? That it lets us pay attention on that level. And like I said, we won't always catch it on the day. But maybe, and I remember one person where I completely, utterly missed the mark with them. And they left angry. And I'm not sure why they gave me the grace to give me a second shot. Like, they actually came back for their next appointment. And I remember just starting with, before we get into today, I'm just wondering, could we go back to happened last week. So I felt like I really missed the mark with you, and that was distressing for you. And he's like, yeah, and explain what it felt like from his point of view. And like, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't want anyone who comes in here to feel like that. And it was interesting because the work after that really deepened. And there's research that suggests, particularly I think in work where there's attachment and those deeper interpersonal processes going on, there's research that suggests that there's more healing or growth or progress after there's been a rift in the therapeutic relationship that's then been healed. Now, obviously, we're not going to go around causing rifts in our therapeutic relationships to see if we can manufacture that or accelerate the work. But there seems to be something about, like, everything's well and good when we're behaving, we're doing our great therapeutic work, but it's kind of like operating in good weather. We only really get tested when, what happens when the bad weather hits? You know, how do we repair a rift that maybe we've contributed to that might actually then help deepen that trust and that safety to go into difficult places, because now we've been tested and we've been shown that we're someone who can be genuine, who can have the grace to apologize, have the humility to go, I stuffed up. And now maybe we might have actually just opened up capacity for deeper work. So while, and as a recovering perfectionist, like every time I'm aware I say dumb things, you know, I'll carry that and we think about 3 a.m. for the next 3 months, you know, I'm going to be hard on myself about it. But if we can have that broader awareness, they go, it is not only so normal, it's an opportunity. And we've also got a chance to model something, because guaranteed the people we're talking to will also say dumb things, will also have those moments of missing something or contributing to a rift in their relationships. And now we've just modeled that this is actually a very human, normal thing. One of the best things my own therapist said to me, which was just, oh my goodness, so helpful. It was so simple. She just said, that's what people do. They annoy each other. Like, and that's what one's like, all right, people are doing, I'm doing that being an annoying person thing. Right. Oh, I'm having an annoyed reaction to something. Wow, that's what happens between people. That's what people do. They annoy each other. Love it.
I mean, this is a beautiful thread through your book, really, is just the humanity, the kind of the of that interaction, that, you know, we're being human together, really, and neither of us will get it all right, and there'll be things that, you know, sort of kind of work well, and you know, perhaps we have missteps, but, you know, the rupture and repair kind of idea that, you know, sometimes things can really you know, go even better after something that's sort of recovered from, you know, and but that basic humanity, and as you know, as you know, I'm sort of a bit of a one-trick pony. I think a lot about compassion and that sort of stuff, and I suppose I'm certainly
There's nothing
hearing
wrong with obsession.
What's that? Sorry.
There's nothing wrong with obsession. I'm bang up for it.
Yeah, that's right. I think you and I kind of share something of a slightly excessive nature about these things, but yeah, it can be messy and difficult and hard to know, you know, like what to do, and you know, but the motivation there is to try to sort of be sensitive and aware and noticing, you know, of the person that we're trying to help, I suppose, and then just doing something to alleviate and prevent the suffering. And sometimes that means kind of review or reflect and you know, just fine tune what we're doing to try to improve upon all of that. But I mean, in some ways, motivational interviewing and listening well and being someone good to talk to and those sorts of bits and pieces are sort of compassion in action, I suppose, in a funny sort of a way. What are your thoughts about everyday encounters as opportunities for this sort of compassionate approach to people in our lives?
Um, yeah, the whole world is a lab, right? Like, um, I really, I really like, Tim Ferriss had a comment about sometimes the universe gives us a pop quiz to test what we've been learning. So when we've been,
Okay.
trying to, cultivate certain qualities and ways of being within ourselves, the universe is going to come along and test us. Certainly,
Absolutely.
test our humility. Um, that it's a way of being that I think, I guess one of the ways that my mind works is if I can find a really fundamental principle that works in nearly every, if not every situation that I can think of, it's got that kind of robustness rather than, well, in this situation, you do this. In that situation that you do that, when we find these fundamental ways of being, like principles that can guide us across a lot of very different situations, it kind of simplifies things. So whether we're at a barbecue or whether we're sitting in a therapy room on either side, or we're at the dog park, where can some of these principles just guide how do I want to turn up? How do I want to respond? And I think one of the things that drew me to MI in the first place was that it was friendly.
That was exactly the word in my mind just then. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's not critical of wanting to fix people. It comes from a great place. It gives aspirations about the kind of skills we might want to use, but it's kind of pragmatic about the fact that we definitely will not always use them. And there may be times it's something else, that Steve Rolnick will talk about MI as one way to be helpful, which then, as he says, raises, well, what are some of the other ways? And what does it even mean to be helpful? So if we can kind of have a friendly, kind of pragmatic approach, it helps take some of that pressure off. Because I think one thing that can happen is this can feel awfully worthy, that, and I know I can have that reaction to when I get, into wanting to be my best self, or, be really true to my values and being perfectly aligned with my values, or even, the idea of compassion brings in such a rich body of spiritual wisdom. It can feel a bit heavy or big
Daunting.
or technical or complex. Whereas if we can find a friendly voice with humor, is one of the reasons I love people like Pema Chodron to listen to, because she's so funny about these very human, messy, complicated things that we do. And just that sense of, I think one thing I wanted to do with the book was, clinicians are trying so hard. They're working so hard. They're meaning so well. And they often are the first to beat themselves up. They're the first to hold themselves to far higher standards than they would ever hold anyone else, particularly their clients. That one thing I didn't really see a lot of in the literature was friendly, bit of humor, time poor, ADHD friendly, short writing that's more like just having a little conversation with a friend that might then just roll around in your head like a marble, or not. It might just fall out the other ear because today was not the day for that thought. Maybe there's something else in the book that might resonate, or might resonate on another day. But, how do we create, I've kind of been so curious about, how do we create an ecosystem of empathy? Because when we do, particularly when we do one-on-one work, but even if we're working with groups or families, the clinician is alone in the room in terms of their role. and it can feel lonely. Whereas how do we cultivate this kind of ecosystem of empathy that each individual clinician is a part of, which also means we're not alone? And how do we give each other a little lift, or, and you're doing this beautifully with your podcast, with my sense of the novel that you're writing. You're leaving little handles and footholds and places where someone walking along behind you might go, oh, that gave me a little leg up. It's not telling someone what they should do. It's not giving someone the path or the manual, but you're distilling things that you've come across that have been helpful in a curious, wondering way. And then kind of another clinician might come along and go, oh, that bit was helpful. That's actually what I needed. I needed a little bit of a foothold in this. I needed a little bit of a handle because I was feeling a bit lost with that situation or with that challenge. So I think there's something about, in a culture that goes, we've got to be big, we've got to have the book and the course and the lecture tour and the this and the, it's like sometimes just doing a little something can be really helpful. It's just this little contribution to our ecosystem, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
I've got a couple of colleagues in the States who picked up my book and turned it into a course.
yes.
There's no way I would have thought to do what they did with it. It's like, oh, thank goodness. It's like I don't have to come up with everything, but I can put a little bit out there that kind of suits the way my brain works. And if we all just chip in that little bit and people share their wisdom and share their little footholds and handles, then together this difficult, often challenging, often distressing work can become just that little bit easier, a little bit friendlier, a little bit lighter, which means people can sustain it. I think, and that is one reason I think people come to MI, is it helps you go home with less of a headache, which means you're more likely to turn up again the next day.
Yeah. Yes, no, that is how how I received the book, I think, is just these uh, little snippets that help bring us back to certain anchors, certain principles or ideas that we can use, practice and use broadly, and you've mentioned lots of things, the warmth and friendliness, the empathy piece, but hope as well as being central. And we sort of touched on the courage and the wisdom parts of all of that, and the patience, I guess, was in there. And,
Not my
these are all
fault.
sort of all these little kind of anchors that are a bit like the keys on the piano, because we just keep practicing, I suppose. I mean, you are a beautiful writer. You do also some lovely little snippets on LinkedIn, I think. So if anyone is interested in following Helen on LinkedIn, please do so, because again, it's a bit like the little chapters in the book, I suppose. These little sort of
Yeah.
thoughts, things to reflect on, and that sort of stuff. And so that's really cool as well. Being part of just the great conversation, I guess, isn't it? This ongoing conversation that we're having across the ages about how to be helpful. What do you have in the works at the moment? Non-fiction or perhaps fiction?
Well, there's certainly in Melbourne, with our extensive lockdowns, we were kind of given the choice of you can make sourdough or write a novel. I think that's
Right.
kind of how I took it. And I did a bit of sourdough, but
Okay.
I really wasn't eating that enough bread to keep that thing alive. So I was stuck with trying to write a novel. So I'm trying to write a novel.
Love it.
I do have my blog, which is what I
Yep.
post on LinkedIn, and I'm up
Oh,
to
yes.
just over 100 posts, I think, on that,
Yep.
on different aspects of our half of the helping relationship. And, that might become another the foundation for another resource down the track. Quite like the idea of having more friendly resources out there, because I think the work can feel so heavy, and we can put, like I said, we can put so much pressure on ourselves to, step up and meet the hour of need. And
There's a lot of recovering perfectionists out there, I think.
oh, yeah, and I mean, it kind of makes sense that a lot of us found this work because we would rather be doing something than nothing. We would rather be trying to make a difference than feel like we're ignoring someone else's suffering. But it can get, like, I certainly know for myself, I can get very weighted down by a sense of responsibility if I'm not careful. And while I quite like responsibility in that it's quite a helpful quality in a lot of ways, it can get it can feel like eating wheat bix without milk sometimes. Like, it can get really very worthy, very, so like, how do we just have a bit more, have a laugh, and that might not be for everyone, but I know for me, humor is part of how I process information. So I feel like the work is serious enough that we don't have to make everything about the work 100% serious either. Also, I do think there is this relationship between humor and hope, because if we can see the humor in even the worst situations, it means it's not 100% bad. Like, there's something about humor that offers this little glimmer of sunshine that doesn't deny or erase the fact that there is suffering and there is hardship. But I don't think we've always been so good at how do we bring a bit of gentle, kind humor into how we talk about this work, because there's a really serious risk that it can sound flippant, or it can become too much about the person's sense of humor, and that might not be everyone else's sense of humor. It can feel like telling jokes or something. But how can we have this, and I do find, people like Pema Chodron and the Buddhist teachers that I have learnt the most from have this beautiful capacity to find humor in the depth of suffering in this very genuine and connecting way. It's just, I was listening to a talk recorded by Pema Chodron where someone talked about this, tough life she'd been through and addiction and how she'd worked so hard to give that up. And then someone had said, well, you might find the path of Buddhism helpful. And I've been working so hard on that. And then Pema just says with this gentle laugh, and then you found it didn't work. Like, just the difficulty of what we're trying to do, but with this like warmth and acceptance. Yes. And isn't it kind of funny? So yeah.
You do have a turn of phrase, Helen, that brings in both sort of feeling moved and amused in the reader, I think. So yeah, I think your book is available on the different online stores and stuff like that, and I think I'll put links.
Just Amazon, because I got to the point of putting it up there, and when my brain is fried on how to work out online platforms, that will do for now.
Yeah, I'll put links to that in the description, as well as your blog, I suppose. I think that's helenmentha.com, isn't it? Is that your
Ourmentha.com, and you can link to it through my work.
Professional site as well. Yeah. But yes, Helen Mentha, thank you for this wonderful contribution, but also thank you for coming and speaking with me on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you. It's been delightful.